programs that I attended, all of the education that I had, college, public, and otherwise, nobody ever told me that I was an African woman. Nobody ever told me what the history of African people were. Nobody ever told me that America is business, and without business you will have nothing and be nothing. And nobody ever told me how to organize business so that I would be able to develop institutions in my own community. So now the sincerity of all of the programs and all of the education has to be questioned, indicted, and convicted, because the bottom line is that America is not and has never tried to produce African adults who are functional, self-sufficient, who understand their politics, their economics, and their relationship to the world politics and the world economics. Listen, you have to have some confidence in the power of African people amongst ourselves to establish a foundation.
We have.
No, we haven't. We have utter chaos in our cities, and you've got to see
no black
that.
Institutions we
You
can
can have a program. I'm not saying we've built a lot of institutions, and those institutions have not been effective. The majority of millions of African youth in this country are dying mentally, dying spiritually, dying emotionally, dying academically, and you may have a program, Mr. Brown may have a program, but what we got to talk about is an American government that tracks millions of African people who don't go to your program, don't go to Brown's program, millions of African people, not only here, but all around the world. And if we are not honest enough to say who are our friends, who are our enemies, to know what a friend is, to know what an enemy is, we will constantly be trying to get into people's parties, to shake our butts with them, to get them to like us, and that's not the question. The question is, what can we build amongst ourselves to secure ourselves from our enemies so that we will be able to survive into the future?
Mayor Kelly wanted to say.
That's not what I heard from Cornel West. There are lots of oases of hope in spite of all of what Sister Souljah says is true. And the sad and pitiful part of it is that the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, most of the media never gives attention to it. And if that weren't bad enough, we know that maybe white America's not going to believe that there are oases of hope where people are empowering themselves, as we have in Washington, D.C., Jackie West taking over her own housing, leading to her own ownership in a community. But the sad and tragic part is that our own community buys into their sense of powerlessness. We surrender to the power of the white man as if we were not the descendants of the first civilization, as if we were not an empowered people. That is the greatest frustration of all.
I never surrendered to anybody, but I'm wise enough to know that if I walk out Washington, D.C. tonight, some black kid in Washington, D.C. is blowing off another black kid's head for a pair of sneakers, because the institutions that we're talking about, not the things that we hold up to say, look, this is one example. The institutions that we're talking about are not saving the minds of those African children. That is the honest truth. None of these Negroes saved me. None of these Negroes.
Your mother didn't help save you?
None of them.
Now you did it by yourself?
Listen. You know who saved me? A man named John Desane in Englewood, New Jersey, who told me who I was, who showed me my history, who told me who my enemies were, who let me know that this was not an easy world, who let me know that this was a cold environment, who let me know. No, what he's not a part of is dilly-dallying with the minds of African children and letting them know what the real situation is in America, where they will be killed if they do not know. He apparently
left out some very important facts. He apparently left out some very important facts, because I think that I hear everything that you're saying, but if you are going to tell me that in the course of this country's history through slavery and civil rights and so forth and so on, everybody who's come before you sold us out, failed, etc., then somebody hasn't told you your history. If the white power structure in this country is going to be said to have destroyed everything black, then you are indicting black people as well. We were, in fact, and we are today engaged in a struggle. We are, in fact, and we were today, in many ways, and you can see it on the street, engaged in a kind of warfare in which our survival is at stake. But don't tell me we have won no battles in that war. None of us would be sitting here at all if some people had won.
I don't know if it's fair to suggest that she's saying there have been no victories.
integrity, especially from a black man in a Republican Party.
But
It lacks
wait a minute,
integrity.
hold up. Let's just make something clear here. This woman has never said that we're supposed to disregard our victories and just focus on the failures. You can't have no justice in this country without equality, and you cannot have in this country any peace without justice. So when you talk, when this man sits over here and tries to berate Sister Souljah and say that what she is saying, okay, is that we haven't accomplished anything, the woman is basically saying that before you can liberate a people, you have to first liberate your mind and stop kissing the behind of white Republicans and white Democrats and thinking that you get in the head.
This must be the time for the president of Boston University, John Silver, to make what point, sir?
Well, I want to say that I think the claim that there's no conscience among the white people in America is a great example of racism. I don't think the face of racism is any prettier when it's black racism than when it's white racism. And I'd like to finish this. When Martin Luther King started his civil rights movement, he put his conscience before the American people and shamed an overwhelming majority of the white people by the strength of his moral argument. And the elevation of his moral argument was based on many of the things that he had learned from the individuals he cited in the letter from a Birmingham jail. Plato, Socrates, Jefferson, Augustine, Amos, Isaiah, Jesus. He recognized very well that he was fighting for the reform of a racist America on the basis of the views held by the dominant white society, and for that reason he reached them, and he so transformed them that you could pass the civil rights legislation under Lyndon Johnson.
That's such a lie.
And there is no
because of how his political position evolved. He was killed because he became more independent and more critical of the American government.
Why don't you let me finish? If somebody thinks that you refute what I have to say, if you think that you refute what I have to say by pointing out that Martin Luther King was assassinated, I can point out to you that Malcolm X was assainated.
That's not the refutation of what you're saying.
He was assassinated by a black man who hated white people.
No. Let me say this. I got to say this because we always go to white males to tell us what's happening. You see, let me tell you something. This is such a lie, a crock of crap. Because the reason why the United States, the only reason why the political leadership in the United States conceded to integration, conceded to civil rights for black people, is because the majority of the people of the world in the 1960s were ascending to political power and independence, and the United States could not claim moral leadership of the world and enslave black people in a system of Jim Crowism. So don't make like that Martin Luther King appealed to the better half or the morality of white America. White America did what was expedient politically.
Mr. Colvesall wanted to say.
I just wanted to say this. I have sat on panels on television 25 years ago and heard exactly the same debate between white and black and within the ranks of black people. And that underlines what's on my mind today. I mean, walking in the poorest streets of New York and Chicago nowadays, looking into the eyes of these kids, I just think to myself, nothing has changed. So many years, so many lives. I know you like to end these shows on some kind of optimistic note, but I can't. I feel despair.
May I ask the panel to comment on this? Here's what I think you wanted to say, Professor West.
Yeah, see, despair is paralyzing. If it is as bad as we know and you say, that's precisely why we have to do something. That's precisely why rage, as real and authentic as it is, cannot have the last word. We are people of hope. That's why we go to church on Sunday. That's why we party on Friday. That's why we come to these kind of little meetings. Because we've got to find some hope in this situation. And the hope is grounded in and looking at the situation for what it is.
Dr.
Rage is not a marketable commodity.
As we started this program, I said there's been a lot of growth and a lot of change in the way people of different incomes, African-American people, live in suburbs and cities. And there's a lot to build on. I think Cornel West is right. I think you're too hard on it. I think Tony Brown is talking about things that are happening and can happen and that we can build on. I 25 years ago, I wasn't a member, but I was the research director of the Kerner Commission. And I do not believe that things are worse. And I think that we have a ways to go, and we've got to keep going. And I couldn't agree more with Cornell. Despair is not helping.
Yes, but I'll tell you what I do believe. If I get, my gray hair entitles me to say that 25 years ago I presided over similar events. And I do see somewhat of a difference, Mr. Kozo. We were, in those days, more into great society. Oh my God, look at the sins we've committed here. We're going to help you. With white, powerful, wealthy America. Now I hear more and more young people of Sister Souljah's age bracket speaking out to say, we've got to do this ourselves.
People get the impression that when you're an activist that you don't also do business, that you aren't also involved in programs, that you don't also attend church. You can do all of these things and still see the savage inequalities and the evil of this society. And the reason why we speak clearly and fiercely and strongly about it is because if we don't, you have people suffering in silence who never get the opportunity to be on with Phil Donahue, who never get, see, we can't look at the world as the mayor of Washington, D.C. or as Cornell West, the author. You see what I'm saying? You got to look through the eyes of the majority of your children, how they see the world, what they feel, the pain that they experience, how they would, how they would define things.
We are forgetting.
The evil is all over. Right now in South Africa, African people are in a system of slavery.
This argument is the same as 25 years ago.
Look at this dynamic. Look at this dynamic. I want people to understand this dynamic. You have a black man over here.
Yes.
He didn't cut nobody. Let me tell you, Stan. He didn't cut this guy off over here. He didn't cut him off talking about he walked through the ghetto. I live in the ghetto. I will cut you off now. So now he didn't do that. You see, what I want you to understand is this: is that it's very important that when we speak, at least when I speak, okay, I'm going to speak the reality of black people who don't have a voice. There's no such thing as freedom of speech in America. Okay, and therefore, when this man could talk about building grassroots organizations and power bases, and Tony could talk about recycling programs, and not one of them could probably name one black political prisoner that's a consequence of trying to do those very programs. And then this sister tries to point out, see, Brian,